Officer, I know how this looks, but you have to understand. I didn't intend for the Flamingos to develop a hive mind, or for Number 7 to learn how to operate the sprinkler system. That was absolutely not in the programming. The cop sighs, pen hovering over his citation pad. Sir, I've been on the force for 15 years, and I've never had to write up a mechanical waterfowl disturbance. Behind us, Mrs. Dunaway, the HOA president, shrieks as Flamingo #12 begins its pre-programmed dance routine, blocking her path to her Lexus. Its LED eyes flash in what I swear is satisfaction. Maybe we should start from the beginning, the officer suggests, watching as one of my creations attempts to nest in the community gazebo. I take a deep breath. It all started 3 months ago with a garden gnome. All I wanted was a fresh start. That's what everyone wants after a divorce, right? A new beginning, a clean slate, a chance to reinvent yourself in a place where nobody knows that you once drunkenly attempted karaoke at your ex-wife's company Christmas party. So I bought a house in Sunny Meadows Estates, a place so idyllic it might as well have been named "We Have Property Values, Not Personalities." The lawns were uniform, the mailboxes identical, and the people, well, let's just say they made the lawns seem vibrant by comparison. My ex, Karen, thought it was hilarious. You? In a subdivision? With an HOA? Mike, you once built a trebuchet to launch water balloons at door-to-door salesmen. People change, I told her when she dropped off our daughter, Lily, for the weekend. I'm embracing suburbia. It's good for Lily to have stability. Karen just laughed. Good luck, suburb man. Don't start any revolutions. Lily, 12 years old, and already too smart for her own good, looked around at the beige houses with their precisely trimmed hedges and made a face. Dad, it's like someone photocopied the same house 20 times. It's not that bad, I said, showing her around my new 3-bedroom colonial with the exact same floor plan as every third house on the street. It's boring, she declared, dropping her backpack in the middle of the hallway. You need something with personality. That's how it started. A simple father-daughter trip to the garden center turned into Lily, insisting that I needed yard decorations. Not flowers. Those required maintenance, and, according to Lily, were too expected. No, she had her eye on the garden statues. This one, she said, pointing at a 2-foot-tall garden gnome. Not one of those cheerful, rosy-cheeked fellows with a fishing pole or a wheelbarrow. This gnome was burly, bearded, and giving the world's most enthusiastic middle finger. Lily, I said, trying to be the responsible parent. I don't think that's appropriate for the front yard. It's art, Dad. Lily rolled her eyes in that special way only pre-teens can master. Besides, it looks just like Uncle Dave. She wasn't wrong. My brother Dave did have that exact expression perpetually frozen on his face. Your mom will kill me, I muttered. But I was already reaching for my wallet. The gnome, whom Lily immediately named Aristotle, took up residence beside my front walkway the very next day. I positioned him facing the street, his stony middle finger greeting everyone who passed by. I knew it was childish. I knew it was probably against some rule somewhere, but watching Lily laugh every time she saw it made it worth whatever fine the HOA might levy. The HOA. God, I was so naive back then. The knock came at 7:30 the next morning. I opened the door in my bathrobe to find a woman who looked like she'd been preserved in vinegar since the early 1990s. Mr. Lawson, I'm Constance Dunaway, president of the Sunny Meadows HOA. The woman on my doorstep looked like she subsisted entirely on iceberg lettuce and disapproval. Your decoration violates Code 7.3 of our community bylaws. It's a garden gnome, I said, not fully awake and desperately needing coffee. It's making an obscene gesture. She thrust a clipboard toward me. Here's your violation notice. You have 48 hours to remove it. He's just very passionate about his gardening philosophy, I said, not taking the clipboard. Mr. Lawson. Her painted-on eyebrows drew together. This isn't negotiable. The bylaws clearly state that offensive decorations are prohibited. That thing is offensive. To whom? The other garden gnomes whose delicate sensibilities might be wounded. Her lips thinned to the point of invisibility. This is your first warning. Further non-compliance will result in fines starting at $100, with an additional $50 per day it remains on your property. She slapped the violation notice against my chest and marched back down my walkway, making sure to give Aristotle a wide berth as if he might suddenly animate and flip her off in person. I looked down at the notice. It was printed on heavy cream stationery with the HOA logo embossed at the top. These people weren't messing around. Dad? Lily appeared behind me in her pajamas. What's going on? Nothing, sweetie, I said, closing the door. Just meeting the neighbors. I had no intention of removing Aristotle. The gnome stayed exactly where he was while I researched the HOA bylaws, looking for loopholes. There had to be a way around this. It wasn't just about a middle-finger-wielding garden decoration anymore. It was about principle. The first fine arrived exactly 48 hours and 15 minutes later, taped to my door in an envelope that matched the cream stationery of the warning. Inside was a printed slip for $100 and a reminder that additional daily fines would accumulate until the offensive item was removed. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the recycling bin. The next day, another notice appeared, $150. The day after that, $200. By the end of the week, I'd accumulated $450 in fines and an invitation to attend the monthly HOA meeting to discuss my ongoing violations. I went to that meeting ready for battle, armed with printouts of garden gnomes throughout history and an argument about artistic expression. What I wasn't prepared for was walking into a room that felt like a tribunal, with Constance Dunaway seated at the center of a long table, flanked by 4 other board members, who all had the same pinched expression. Mr. Lawson, Mrs. Dunaway said as I took a seat in the folding chairs arranged for the peasantry. So glad you could join us. We're discussing your gnome situation under new business. I sat through 45 minutes of mind-numbing discussions about approved mailbox colors, acceptable holiday decoration time frames, and a heated debate about whether wind chimes constituted noise pollution before they finally got to me. Now, regarding the Lawson violation, Mrs. Dunaway said, shuffling her papers importantly. Mr. Lawson has installed an offensive garden decoration that clearly violates Section 7, Paragraph 3 of our community bylaws. Despite written warning and accumulating fines, the item remains. The board will now hear Mr. Lawson's explanation. I stood up, clutching my research. Thanks for having me. I've been looking into the history of garden gnomes. Mr. Lawson, interrupted a balding man who I would later learn was Harold Fitzwilliam, HOA treasurer and Constance's most devoted minion. We're not here for a history lesson. The issue is simple. Your decoration violates our standards of decency. Says who? I challenged. Art is subjective. One person's offensive gesture is another person's cultural expression. It's giving everyone the finger, Mr. Lawson, Mrs. Dunaway said flatly. There's nothing subjective about it. Actually, I began, but was cut off by an elderly woman in the back row. Oh, for heaven's sake, leave the man alone! She stood up, leaning on a cane that I was pretty sure she could wield as a weapon, if necessary. I've seen the gnome. It's got personality. This neighborhood could use more personality and less beige. Thank you, Eleanor, Mrs. Dunaway said in a tone suggesting this wasn't the first time Eleanor had disrupted proceedings. But the bylaws are clear. The bylaws were written by people with sticks so far up their— Eleanor began. Let's put it to a vote, Mrs. Duniway cut her off sharply. All in favor of enforcing the violation and requiring Mr. Lawson to remove the offensive statue? 4 hands went up among the board members. All opposed? Eleanor's hand shot up, along with a few others scattered throughout the room. The vote is final, Mr. Lawson, Mrs. Duniway said with barely concealed satisfaction. Remove the offensive statue within 48 hours. Or what? You'll send the garden gnome police? First, a $100 fine. Then $50 more each day it remains. And should you choose not to comply— She smiled thinly. We have ways of dealing with difficult residents. Eleanor leaned over to whisper to me as the meeting moved on to the next item. They foreclosed on the Hendersons last year over Christmas lights in February. They can do that? I whispered back. They can try, she said grimly. I'm Eleanor Chen. Been fighting these buzzards for 6 years now. She nodded toward a man across the room. That's Jamal Washington. He's in a war over his bird feeders. You should talk to him. After the meeting, I found myself in the parking lot with Eleanor and Jamal, forming what would later become known as the HOA Resistance Trinity by the neighborhood kids. They're relentless, Jamal confirmed. He was a retired Air Force colonel with an impressive mustache and an even more impressive collection of banned bird feeders. Once they mark you as a troublemaker, they never let up. So what do? I asked. Depends, Eleanor said. How much do you like your gnome, and how deep are your pockets? I looked at the mounting fines. I thought about Lily's face when we bought Aristotle. Then I thought about my mortgage, child support payments, and the fact that I'd only been at my new software engineering job for 6 months. The next day, I removed Aristotle from the yard. Lily was heartbroken when she visited that weekend. They made you take down my gnome? Lily asked, clearly disappointed as we walked through the backyard. Yeah, sweetie. I'm sorry. Apparently Mr. Aristotle was too confrontational for the neighborhood aesthetic. She kicked at the grass. That's so dumb. What are you going to do? I glanced back at the garage where my old robotics kit from my startup days sat gathering dust. I'd worked for a company developing educational robots before the funding dried up. I'm not sure yet, but I think it might involve a little creative interpretation of the HOA bylaws. Dad. She gave me that look, the one that's half warning, half excitement. What are you planning? Nothing that violates the letter of the law, honey, just possibly its spirit. That night, after Lily went to bed, I pulled out the HOA bylaws and a bottle of scotch. I was going to find a loophole if it killed me. And find one I did, buried in Section 7, Paragraph 3, the very section they'd cited against me. The exact wording prohibited stationary decorative figures exceeding 12 inches in height that display offensive gestures or messages. Stationary. That was the key word. The next morning, I called my old college roommate, Vincent Patel, now a robotics engineer at Northwestern University. Vince, I said when he picked up, how do you feel about a little suburban warfare? Let me get this straight, Vincent said, beer halfway to his lips. We were sitting at O'Malley's, a dive bar equidistant from both our houses. You want to build robotic flamingos to annoy your HOA? Not just annoy, legally outmaneuver. And you think this will work? How exactly? I slid my tablet across the table, showing him the loophole in the HOA wording. They banned statues. These won't be statues. They'll move. Mike, you do realize this is insane, right? You could just paint your mailbox a boring color like a normal passive-aggressive neighbor. Where's the fun in that? Besides, it'll be a great project to do with Lily. Educational, even. Vincent sighed deeply. You're going to do this with or without me, aren't you? Yep. Fine. But I want video of the HOA lady's face when these things activate. Over the next few weekends, Lily and I transformed my garage into a workshop. I ordered supplies, pink plastic flamingos, the classic lawn variety, small motors, basic microcontrollers, motion sensors, and solar panels. I wasn't going to create Boston Dynamics-level robots, just enough to make a point. "Why flamingos?" Lily asked as we unpacked the first box. "Because they're ridiculous," I explained, "and nothing says I respect property values quite like a lawn full of pink birds." Our first prototype was, to put it kindly, underwhelming. The flamingo wobbled a few feet, tipped over, and lay there with its legs spinning uselessly in the air. "I think we need help," Lily admitted after our third failed attempt. That's when I remembered Dexter Williams, a contractor who'd done some electrical work on my house when I first moved in. He'd mentioned being a tinkerer, and I'd noticed the custom modifications on his work truck. I gave him a call. "Robotic yard flamingos, huh?" he said when I explained the project. "To mess with your HOA?" "Think of it as an engineering challenge with a side of social commentary." He showed up the next day with a toolbox that would make NASA envious and a gleam in his eye that told me he was exactly the right person for this job. "All right, Flamingo 1.0, let's see what you've got," I said, placing the prototype on the garage floor. Lily held the remote control, tongue between her teeth in concentration. 3, 2, 1, launch! The flamingo jerked forward, got about 3 feet, then spun in an erratic circle before tipping over. "Well," Dexter said, scratching his beard, "that was anticlimactic." "It moved, though," Lily argued. "That technically makes it not a statue." "True, but I think we need to aim higher than technically not a statue if we want to really make a point," I said, righting our fallen bird. Dexter picked up his tools. "What you need is stability and purpose. These babies need to do something beyond just moving. They need personality." "Like what?" Lily asked. Dexter grinned. "What if they responded to certain stimuli, like, I don't know, the sound of someone complaining about lawn height?" I looked at him. "You're an evil genius." "I prefer creatively vindictive." 2 weeks later, we had 3 functioning robotic flamingos ready for deployment. They weren't sophisticated, just basic movement patterns programmed to activate at random intervals, with a homing function to return them to their starting positions by nightfall. But they moved. Definitely not stationary. I positioned them in my front yard at dawn, arranged in a casual triangle. By 9 a.m., Mrs. Dunaway's Lincoln Navigator had driven by 3 times. By noon, I had an audience of neighborhood kids watching from the sidewalk as Flamingo #2 rotated slowly toward the street. The doorbell rang at 3 p.m. "Mr. Lawson." Mrs. Dunaway stood at the edge of my lawn, arms crossed, watching as Flamingo #2 rotated 45 degrees toward her. "What exactly are these things?" "Lawn ornaments, Mrs. Dunaway, pink birds, very tasteful." "They're moving," she said, stating the obvious as Flamingo #1 took a small step forward. "Yes, they do that. Fascinating, aren't they?" The flamingo took 2 mechanical steps forward. Mrs. Dunaway took 1 step back. "This is clearly an attempt to circumvent HOA regulations." I pulled out a laminated copy of the HOA bylaws from my back pocket. I'd started carrying it with me at all times, like a suburban constitution. Actually, I've been reviewing our community guidelines. They specifically prohibit stationary decorative figures. These aren't stationary, they move. See? I gestured as Flamingo #3 proved my point by pivoting. Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't over, Mr. Lawson." "I certainly hope not. The birds are just getting settled." The next day, I received an emergency notice for a special HOA meeting to address mobile lawn decorations. I showed up with a lawyer's opinion letter that Eleanor had helped me obtain, stating that retroactive rule changes couldn't be applied to existing decorations without a 6-month grace period, according to state law. "The motion on the floor," Mrs. Dunaway announced to the packed community center, "is to amend Bylaw 7.3 to include all decorative figures, whether stationary or mobile." Oh, I stood up. Point of order. I've consulted with legal counsel who confirms that such amendments cannot be retroactively applied to existing property features without a grace period of at least 6 months per state law governing HOAs. I distributed copies of the legal brief to the stunned board members. "Furthermore," I continued, enjoying myself perhaps too much, "any attempt to selectively enforce such a rule against only my property could constitute discriminatory practices." Mrs. Dunaway's face turned the exact shade of my flamingos. From the back, I heard Eleanor stage whisper, "Check and mate." The amendment passed, but with the 6-month grace period legally required. I had half a year to enjoy my flamingos and to plan my next move. Over the following weeks, I gradually increased the flock to 7. Each new addition had slightly more advanced programming. Flamingo #4 could detect movement and turn to face it. Flamingo #5 would follow shadows. Flamingos #6 and #7 could coordinate their movements to walk in tandem. The neighborhood was divided. Some found it hilarious, stopping by daily to see what the flamingos were doing. Others, mostly friends of Mrs. Dunaway, gave my house a wide berth, as if the robots might attack. Lily's weekend visits now revolved around programming new behaviors. She named each flamingo and insisted they had distinct personalities. I didn't have the heart to tell her they were just following code, especially when I started noticing some unexpected behaviors myself. "My kids insist on walking by your house every day after school," said Sarah Patterson, a neighbor from 2 streets over whom I'd never met before. "They call it the Flamingo Show." "Oh, I hope it's not bothering you," I said, genuinely concerned. I was adjusting Flamingo #4's solar panel in the front yard. "Are you kidding? It's the highlight of their day, especially when they do that synchronized routine at 4:15. She leaned in. "Also, watching Constance Dunaway have an aneurysm every time she drives by is the best entertainment this neighborhood has had in years." "I aim to please," I said, giving the flamingo a pat. "Just one question," she said, watching as the flamingos began their afternoon dance. "Why flamingos?" I smiled. "Because nothing says, 'I respect property values,' quite like a lawn full of pink birds doing the Macarena." The 6-month grace period was halfway over when Mrs. Dunaway escalated to legal threats. A cease and desist letter arrived via certified mail, claiming my flamingos were creating a public nuisance and potential safety hazard. I was contemplating my response when Flamingo #5 experienced its first major malfunction. A loose wire caused it to veer off course during its afternoon patrol, sending it wobbling into the street just as Mrs. Dunaway was driving past. She slammed on her brakes, narrowly missing the confused robot, and immediately pulled out her phone. 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. "Mr. Lawson." The officer at my door looked tired. "I'm Officer Rodriguez. We got a call about a rogue lawn ornament creating a traffic hazard." I spotted Mrs. Dunaway watching from her porch across the street. "Ah, yes. Sorry about that, officer. Flamingo #5 had a navigational glitch. I've already retrieved him and fixed the issue." He glanced at his notepad. "This is the first time I've been called out for flamingo-related issues in 15 years on the force. Hopefully the last." He looked over at my lawn where the remaining 6 pink birds were currently frozen in place, as if innocent. "Somehow I doubt that, sir." Officer Rodriguez became a regular presence over the next few weeks. Each time a flamingo strayed too close to a property line or malfunctioned in some minor way, Mrs. Dunaway would call the police. To his credit, Rodriguez maintained remarkable professionalism, though I caught him smiling more than once at the flamingo's antics. "You know," he said during his 5th visit in 2 weeks, "there are easier ways to make a point." "Maybe," I admitted, retrieving Flamingo #3, which had developed a fascination with Mrs. Dunaway's prized rose bushes. "But I'm in too deep now." "Just keep them out of the street," he advised. "I'd hate to have to write up an incident report involving a plastic bird casualty." What happened next was entirely Lily's fault, though I take full responsibility as her father and fellow conspirator. "Dad, don't be mad," Lily said, showing me her phone, where her TikTok account displayed 200,000 views of our latest flamingo routine. "I'm not mad. I'm concerned. I didn't exactly want national attention." "But look at the comments. Everyone's on our side. #Flamingo Revolution is trending." "That's not helping my keep a low profile strategy, sweetie." "Too late for that." She scrolled through her feed. "Channel 7 wants to interview you. And the Flamingos." I dropped my head into my hands. Your mother is going to kill me. Actually, Mom thinks it's hilarious. She's Team Flamingo all the way. The local news van showed up the next day. I tried to decline the interview, but Lily had already promised them a demonstration of the Flamingo's latest dance routine, a coordination between all 7 that mimicked the Thriller choreography. "So, Mr. Lawson?" the perky reporter asked while her cameraman zoomed in on Flamingo #7. "What inspired you to create these robotic lawn ornaments?" "It was actually a response to an HOA dispute," I explained, trying to be diplomatic. "They didn't approve of my previous garden decoration, so I found a creative workaround." "Some might call it malicious compliance," she suggested with a grin. "I prefer creative interpretation of the rules." The story aired that night. Suburban Dad's robotic flamingo rebellion goes viral. By morning, the video had been picked up by national news outlets. My phone exploded with calls from friends, distant relatives, and former colleagues who recognized me. The HOA's lawyer sent a more strongly worded letter the next day. I forwarded it to Sandra Ortiz, a lawyer Eleanor recommended who specialized in HOA disputes. "Legally, you're on solid ground," Sandra said, reviewing the papers spread across my dining table. "You haven't violated any bylaws as they were written at the time of installation." "So we win?" "Courts don't always follow pure logic, Mike. A judge might decide that 12 robotic flamingos constitutes a nuisance, regardless of the technical wording." 12? I only have 7, I said, confused. Sandra raised an eyebrow. "Your complaint mentions 12? I counted again in my head. 7. I definitely had 7. Unless... I excused myself and went to the garage, where Dexter was supposed to be performing routine maintenance on the flock. He was hunched over a workbench, surrounded by pink parts. "Dexter," I said slowly, "are you building more flamingos?" He jumped, nearly dropping what was clearly Flamingo #8's partially assembled head. "I can explain?" "Please do." "The neighbors took up a collection," he said sheepishly. "Eleanor, Jamal, Sarah from 2 streets over, they all pitched in. They want to expand the flock before the 6-month deadline." I should have said no. I should have put my foot down and been a responsible adult. Instead, I said, "How many are we talking about?" 5 more? Maybe 6 if we can get the parts in time." What can I say? The resistance was growing, and who was I to stand in its way? By the time the 6-month grace period was nearly up, we had 15 flamingos, each with increasingly sophisticated programming. They could coordinate complex movements, respond to specific voice commands, mostly Lily's, and had developed what Dexter insisted on calling personality quirks. Flamingo #7 had a bizarre obsession with water systems. It would find its way to sprinklers and hoses with uncanny precision. #3 had developed a habit of following the mailman along his route. #12, the newest addition, performed elaborate dance routines at random intervals, usually when Mrs. Dunaway was within viewing distance. "What exactly did you change in the programming?" Dexter asked one afternoon, watching as Flamingo #7 systematically turned on each of my sprinkler zones for exactly 30 seconds. "Nothing that should cause this," I insisted, scrolling through code on my laptop. "I just updated their return to base timing." "Well, something's definitely different. #3 followed the Amazon delivery guy all the way to the Hendersons' house yesterday." "That's not possible with their programming limitations." Flamingo #9 waddled by, carrying a small twig in its beak. "Is it building a nest?" Dexter asked incredulously. "That's definitely not in the programming." We watched in silence as 2 more flamingos joined #9, each bringing their own twigs. "Mike," Dexter said slowly, "I think we might have accidentally created some form of rudimentary AI." "Don't be ridiculous, they're just malfunctioning." As if to contradict me, all 3 flamingos turned their heads toward us simultaneously, their LED eyes blinking in unison. "Yeah," Dexter said, backing up slowly. "Just a malfunction." Whatever was happening with the flamingos' programming, it was getting harder to explain away. They started coordinating in ways I hadn't programmed, developing what seemed like preferences and habits. #7's water obsession led to it disconnecting Mrs. Dunaway's garden hose during her weekly bridge club, creating what Eleanor later described as a water feature that ruined Gladys's new perm. The police were called, again. "Mr. Lawson." Officer Rodriguez didn't even sound surprised anymore. "This is the 3rd call this week." I know. I was trying to coax Flamingo #4 down from Mrs. Peterson's bird feeder." "I'm working on fixing the programming issue." "Mrs. Dunaway says one of them disconnected her garden hose during her bridge club meeting and created, quote, a water feature that ruined Gladys's new perm." I bit my lip to keep from laughing. "That was probably #7. He has a thing for water systems." "You're talking about them like they have personalities." "At this point, officer, I'm not entirely convinced they don't." Rodriguez watched as 3 flamingos in the distance moved in perfect synchronization across the community green. "Have you considered a career change? The robotics division at the police department could use someone with your unique skills." "Are you offering me a job while responding to a complaint about my lawn ornaments?" "Just thinking ahead. Either you're getting hired somewhere for this talent or you're getting arrested. Figured I'd offer the better option first." The final showdown came during the annual Sunny Meadows Summer Festival. The 6-month grace period had ended the week before, and the new bylaw against mobile decorations was now in full effect. I'd received a formal notice to remove the flamingos, which I was still discussing with Sandra. The festival was the HOA's pride and joy, a carefully orchestrated display of community spirit that was about as spontaneous as a Swiss train schedule. Mrs. Dunaway was scheduled to give an opening speech at the newly renovated community gazebo. I'd locked all 15 flamingos in the garage that morning, not wanting to risk any incidents that might jeopardize our legal position. What I didn't know was that Lily had been experimenting with a new remote activation protocol. She'd wanted to surprise me with flamingos that could be summoned via smartphone. I was standing at the back of the crowd, nursing a cup of lukewarm lemonade, when Mrs. Dunaway tapped the microphone. "Welcome, neighbors, to our 32nd annual Sunny Meadows Summer Festival," she began. "This year, we're celebrating our community's commitment to harmony, uniformity, and strict adherence to bylaws that maintain our property values. There was scattered applause, mostly from the front row where the HOA board members sat. Over the past year, we've faced some challenges, she continued, looking pointedly in my direction. But I'm happy to report that all code violations are being addressed, and our community standards will be— That's when I heard it. The unmistakable whir of 15 sets of Flamingo motors activating simultaneously. I turned to see my garage door open and a line of pink robots marching in formation toward the gazebo. "Oh no," I muttered, frantically patting my pockets for my phone. I needed to shut them down before— "What is the meaning of this?" Mrs. Dunaway shrieked as Flamingo #12 broke from the pack and performed an elaborate pirouette in front of the podium. I spotted Lily at the edge of the crowd, her expression a mixture of panic and delight as she jabbed at her phone screen. Apparently, the new protocol wasn't working quite as expected. The crowd parted as the Flamingos surrounded the gazebo. #7 made a beeline for the festival's temporary sprinkler system, because of course it did. "Make them stop!" Mrs. Dunaway shrieked as Flamingo #12 performed an elaborate dance routine in front of her podium. "I'm trying!" I frantically pressed buttons on the backup remote I always carried. "They're not responding to commands." The crowd was divided between those filming the chaos on their phones and those trying to avoid the increasingly enthusiastic sprinklers that #7 had somehow activated. "Mr. Lawson?" Officer Rodriguez said with remarkable calm as Flamingo #7 orchestrated a water show worthy of the Bellagio. "I think we've moved beyond HOA violations into something else entirely. Technically, I still haven't violated any specific bylaws," I offered weakly. "No, just possibly some laws of robotics." A flamingo waddled by carrying the ceremonial ribbon for the gazebo dedication in its beak. "You know," Eleanor said, appearing beside me with an umbrella, "in all my 70 years, this is by far the most entertaining community event we've ever had." It took nearly an hour to round up all 15 flamingos. By then, the festival was thoroughly derailed. Mrs. Dunaway's carefully coiffed hair was plastered to her head from the sprinklers, and I was facing what I assumed would be multiple citations. But something unexpected happened. As I corralled the last few flamingos, I noticed people were laughing. Not angry, not annoyed, genuinely amused. Kids were chasing the flamingos, helping to herd them. Even some of the HOA board members were hiding smiles. Only Mrs. Dunaway remained unamused, standing with Officer Rodriguez as he tried to figure out what exactly to write on his incident report. "Mechanical waterfowl disturbance isn't in the codebook," he was saying. "This is destruction of property and public nuisance at minimum," she insisted, wringing water from her blazer. "Actually," said Jamal, who'd appeared with a towel for Mrs. Dunaway, "it's the most fun this festival has ever been. My grandkids are asking if the Flamingos will be back next year." A week later, I found myself in a mediation session with the HOA board. Sandra had advised a compromise, suggesting that it might be better to find middle ground than risk a court ruling that could go either way. "What we have here," the mediator said, looking between me and Mrs. Dunaway, "is a classic case of escalation that's gotten out of hand." "He started it with that vulgar,"